Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is the fourth in our series for Black History Month. AARP is so proud to bring this genealogy series that we've had every Tuesday in February. You have been a wonderful audience. Some of you have come back week after week, and we really appreciate you. And my name is Brenda Price. I am the Associate State Director for Outreach in Michigan. So, welcome to Michigan's AARP Black History Month series. We are so glad that you could join us again. We have a wonderful program today, including a lot of information about volunteerism. So, we really hope that you will stay tuned through the entire program so you can hear all that we have to say. I have a very special guest joining me today. She is going to share her genealogy journey, but she's going to speak specifically about the role of our ancestors in history and how your stories from your ancestors have contributed to this country, contributed to what we know about our history. And I am so pleased to have her join us today. And her name is Dr. Mary Clark. And Dr. Clark has been a member of the team volunteering with us for such a long time. So, Mary, it's so glad to see you this week. You have been with us every week, and I want to tell our audience that the success of this series is largely due to Dr. Mary Clark. Mary has brought all of the stars that you've seen over the past few weeks together for us to be able to put this program together. She is a committed AARP volunteer. We couldn't live without her, not only here in Michigan, but across the country, because she serves everywhere. And so, Mary, we are going to look forward to your presentation. And at the end, I'd like to ask a few questions about volunteerism with AARP so that our audience can know that they can be a volunteer too. It's easy, and we'll share more information about that. But in the interim, I want to share a little bit about Mary. Dr. Clark was raised in Millington, Michigan, a rural community about 20 minutes north of Flint. So you were kind of up there in the mitten. She considers herself a fact teller rather than a storyteller. I think that's a very profound statement. Her nonfiction stories are based on lived experience and memories that have been collected in over 30 years of journal writing, stories, letters, and memorabilia shared with her by her elders. She is one of the contributing authors and descendant of a Black homesteaders of the South. Edited by Bernice Alexander Bennett, which chronicles 49 stories of land-owning ancestors and their experiences acquiring their homestead properties between 1880 and the early 1900s. That's pretty phenomenal. That's a lot of information, Dr. Clark. She professionally is retired as an assistant dean at Wayne State University in Detroit. She had a career of over 35 years as a higher education administrator in various leadership positions. And she brings all those talents to her AARP volunteering roles. She earned a BA in fashion merchandising from Bowling Green University, and an MA in counseling from Wayne State, and a PhD in higher education administration from the University of Toledo. I love it, Mary. You definitely practice what you preach in your volunteerism. I can see it whenever I interact with you. And 2014 is when she joined us as a Michigan State appointed AARP volunteer. She also serves as a national volunteer, facilitating trainings with various teams, including staff and volunteers. So we really appreciate all that Mary does. As I said, we couldn't do it without her. Today, she is going to share the insight on ancestral stories. And Mary, I'm going to step aside and let you get started. But before I move to the side, I want to remind our audience, I know many of you have been here previous weeks, this is an participatory process. We want you engaged. So I want to know where you're from around the country. Post it in the chat. If you're sitting on a beach somewhere where I wish I could be, I want to know about it because we still have snow on the ground here in Michigan. We also want you to leave your questions in the chat because we will have an opportunity to respond to them. So thank you all again for joining us. And Dr. Clark, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And what an honor it is to be here today as we wrap up our Black History Month series with the final session. I want to start by saying two things. Those of you who have joined us previously, thank you so much because you have made this session just as enjoyable as our presenters. And I want to ask you a question in the chat. If you have been to our sessions, indicate either with a zero, like this is the first one, or up to 3. How many sessions have you attended of our Black History series so far? Just put it in the chat for us. We want to see who's been here before. The next thing I want to tell you is that I am a student. As you heard Brenda read my bio, I love education, and I am continuing my education in family history and genealogy. I learn something new every day. And so today I hope to share with you some of my learning, and I hope also that many of you will be able to share some of the things that you have gained through this Black History series. So I come to you today as a student in family history. It's often said that history is written by the victors, but family history is written in the whispers of our elders. It's in the letters tucked away in old boxes. It's in those fleeting memories that are passed down that we might think are insignificant, that are passed through the generations. So today, what I want to do, I want to take you through a journey of my own family's past, using some of the things that we've learned from Dr. Shelley Murphy, Bernice Bennett, and Oris Jenkins. I want to tell you some stories about some of the lessons that I've learned as I've listened to them as well. And what I also want you to do today is to think about those things that you may have thought, well, I'm not really a family historian, and I'm certainly not a genealogist, but those little morsels of information that have been shared with you can turn into stories. They can turn into things that are like diamonds for your family, like precious jewels. Because all of us have several books inside of us that we love to write. And I want to demonstrate to you that it doesn't have to be a book, it can be a simple story that you share. The personal narratives that I'll share today remind us that history isn't found just in textbooks, it's in our own families, and it's waiting to be uncovered, preserved, and shared. So as I guide you through these 3 stories, I invite you to think about stories from your own family, how you might preserve them for future generations. One of the things that I'm reminded of that Dr. Shelley shared with us is in creating your stories to follow the land, follow the water, follow the money, the community, and the faith of the people. And so as I incorporate some of what Dr. Shelley has said, I'm going to share my first story with you. And this story will be about voices of our elders that were shared with me at kitchen tables, in phone conversations, and at family gatherings. Their memories helped me to understand the life of my great grandfather built in rural Alabama and the struggles and the triumphs that came from that. But history isn't just passed down through spoken words. Sometimes it begins with just a single moment, a glance at a photograph, maybe through the eyes of a child. So if I could have the first presentation, please. And thank you. So today we're going to talk about what these 4 people have in common. You see Mary in her academic robe. You see my Aunt Flora Roberson Williams. You see a very young Oris Jenkins. And you see my Aunt Carrie Bell Kyles Weeks. What do these 4 people have in common? And how is this about family history? Well, my picture there on the farm and my doctoral regalia is lying on top of a journal. And that journal was dated 1999. And I'm sure you can't see that. So that's why I'm telling you. And what's significant about that is when I picked up my family history that had been stored under a desk all the time when I was working on my PhD. I had to manage my priorities at that time. So my PhD took precedent. And so in this journal, I had written some things that related to picking up the journey and continuing my family history. The family of my Aunt Flora Robertson Williams, who was one of my dear aunts who shared not only oral history with me, she taped it. She sat at her tape recorder and she would just talk into a tape. And many of you may not be familiar with cassette tapes, the younger generation, but there were these things that existed prior to MP4s and CDs. But she would just talk for hours. And what a gift that provided me as she would send me these tapes. And she'd usually say, I already told you this probably, but I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my life. The third picture is Oris Jenkins, and this was around 2000. And again, my picture was in 1999 in my doctoral regalia. Aunt Flora's picture was shortly during that time frame. And Oris, this was in 2000 when he was about 5 years old, I think, and playing with his little sister right before it looks like they were going to church. And the final picture, my Aunt Carrie Bell, she was also one of the finest storytellers of our family history. Aunt Carrie could talk for days without taking a breath. And all you needed to do was listen, and hopefully you'd have a pen or something to record some of the morsels of information that she shared, because she was always dropping wisdom upon me. So these four people tied much of my family history together, and I didn't even know it. So how did these four people tie history together for me? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. But I want to share with you that my earliest memory as a child was about age 4, when I saw the picture at the top in my grandfather's home. These two people are my great grandparents. But I didn't know that when I was 4 years old. All I knew is that when I saw this picture, I was drawn to the person on the left-hand side for some reason. This picture was hanging in the house that's featured in the picture to the right, where there's two men standing in front of it. The man holding the fish up very high and proudly is my grandfather, Joe Kiles. And the man standing next to him is his father, one of his best friends, Julius Caesar Harper. Now, when I walked in that door of that house, I would see this picture on the left-hand side of the wall every time. And like I said, my earliest memory was this 4 years old. So I'd walk in the house, I'd see this picture, I'd look at it. I didn't know anything to say. I didn't ask anybody about it, but I had seen this picture all of my life since I remember, from the age of 4. So what does that have to do with those 3 images with me on the first slide? Well, the picture of the man and the woman, my great grandfather and great grandmother, are the pictures of people who my Aunt Flora talked about in many of the tapes, who my Aunt Carrie talked about in many of her conversations with me, and who that young man, Oris Jenkins, and I soon discovered was a homesteader. And I learned that because Aunt Carrie and Aunt Flora both told me about the land that we had in our family. So looking at the picture below my grandfather is of 4 beautiful women. And I met all 4 of these beautiful women at a family reunion in 2010. Now, the woman in purple, excuse me, is Aunt Carrie. So I knew her previously, but none of the other three had I never met before that. And these four women tied into this homesteader story as well, but I would not know that until much later. And looking at the image to the left, where these dots of various colors are connected, these are people that I also discovered as I delve more deeply into learning about who that person on the left hand side of that picture was. I had no idea that all of these things were interconnected. Now, I failed to share with you what my whole journey in my current search for my ancestors are. And I'm looking for Fanny's people. So, who's Fanny? Well, Fanny is my great grandmother. As you can see, her name is Frances Eddings Kiles, but they refer to her as Fanny. And I have been able to find information about my great grandfather, John Henry Kiles. And I certainly knew and loved my grandfather, Joe Kiles, but I never knew anything about Fanny other than she was born and she died young in 1917. And because she began speaking to me at the age of 4, when I looked in her eyes and I looked curiously and wondered, what is it about her? As I became more diligent in my research, I wanted to know more about Fanny. And so that is what this story is all about. Who are Fanny's people? And all of those dots in that multicolored image in the lower left-hand corner, those people have a connection to Fanny. Why? Because the two people that have the yellow stars connected to them were on Fanny's marriage license. And because their name was also Eddings, I thought that they were related to her. However, I have not been able to prove that yet. So, in searching for Fanny, Oris and I, my research partner now that I met during the pandemic, and as we were both co-authors in the stories of Black homesteaders of the South, Oris and I went on a research trip to Alabama because that's where my family is from, the Geneva, Coffee County, Alabama. And we went on this research trip. And one of the things we did find is Fanny's final resting place. And that's a picture of me standing at the top of her headstone in um, the cemetery. And it was a glorious moment to find that because I felt like I was being led to Fanny. So many of you that are genealogy experts would say, well, you could probably get information about Fanny from her death certificate if she died during the time when death certificates were available. Well, I could if it was recorded on that. So to the right side of this picture, there's a partial listing of Fanny's death certificate. And I know you can't see it clearly, but I'm going to tell you that under Fanny's parents, it was blank. Under Fanny's marital status, it was NS, not certain. Under Fanny's age, it was age 37 or 38. So with these answers, I could tell that it was not Fanny's husband that was the informant of her death. So that's why so many clues are still missing about Fanny. What else we found in the cemetery was 2 headstones that represented daughters of hers that had died without being named. It just said daughters of Frances and J.H. Kiles. So again, another discovery about Fanny, but not a whole lot. So I'm going to share with you a recording that Aunt Flora shared with me. But below the picture of Aunt Flora, you see a partial journal entry, and it said that Aunt Flora sent me 4 tapes, and this was on May 15th, 1999. And this is what one of the four tapes had included. And as you listen to this, listen for how many clues Aunt Flora gave me in this 2-minute tape. 2 minutes. So keep track of how many clues she gave me.
When I was growing up and the people I knew back in those days, there was a whole lot of, well, I won't say a whole lot, but there was a lot of people, black people that owned their own land. Joe Carr's daddy owned his own land, and there was a group of old McNairs. Old man Mac McNair lived on the edge of, right at the edge of Cleveland. That's where his house, I mean, on the edge of Carter Spring. That's where his house was. You leave, you walk out his door, and walk a few steps, and you walk in the drugstore on the square of Carter Spring. But he had several children, and they had their own land. But he was old Indian, him and his wife. And speaking of Indians, my mom took us to visit a cousin of hers back in, oh my goodness, it was back in 1929, I think. I'm sure it was. That owned their own land, and they gave build houses for their sons when they would get married. They had two sons. Their name was, Mama called them Cousin Handy and Cousin Mahaley. And they still, both of them still wore their hair, long white hair, then, because they was old. Down the back, Cousin Mahaley had hers braided in two braids in her part in the center. But Cousin Handless, his head was flat and his hair was long. And we had another off cousin that we ran into in 1929. But I don't remember her name. She had a son named Booker. Her name was Dink. But she had married one of the Hansby men when we ran into. So she was Dink Hansby. I don't ever know. We were only there on that place for years, and we moved back down on the Genevan Enterprise Highway. The trouble with us, we was like a whole lot of other families. We didn't own our own land. We didn't own anything but what was in our house, our furniture. And from almost year to year, my mom and dad would get a place with a white body workers farm that year and move from here to there like a whole lot of other people. We were just one of them fortunate, but we survived it.
So that was actually the longer tape. That was about 3 minutes and 13 seconds. But how many clues did Aunt Flora provide to me in that short 3 minutes? If you kept track, just put it in the chat how many clues that she gave me that I could search as a family historian. And I didn't realize until I listened to that clip again, preparing for this, how rich just a sentence, just a 3-minute conversation with someone can provide you so many clues. So how many conversations have you had with the elders in your family? How many conversations have you the benefit of if you have tape recorded or audio or video? These are the things that make stories and make them rich. So as I conclude this short story, which has gone a little longer, I want to tie it all together for you. Actually, I needed that last slide. Yes. So what I'm showing you in this collage, in this tapestry of people and places and things, is Mary at about 9 years old. So at that point, I had seen that picture of my great grandparents at least 5 years that I remembered. And I was beginning to become a genealogist at that point. Um, Little did I know that. The chair that you see next to that picture is a chair that, after I would see that picture of my grandfather's house, I would sit in that chair. And that chair was built for my mother. And on the bottom of it says Billy, 1946. And Billy is the nickname that my grandfather gave to my mother. And how does that connect? Well, that connects because uh, I was able to learn a little bit more about my ancestors and Fanny and her husband being a homesteader. And I was a contributor to the Black Homesteaders of the South book. And in that process, I learned not only about doing research at the National Archives. Under the guidance of Bernice Bennett, I actually made several trips to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and touched land patents. And this one that I'm holding in that picture in the corner is my great great grandfather, Willis Kyle's land patent that he was never able to claim because he died prior to claiming it. And below that is someone that you hope to run into in the National Archives, Bernice Bennett. And I was so happy that I saw her on one of my research trips. And below that is me holding that picture that was on that wall in my grandfather's house that now sits in my home and I'm the proud owner of. And the picture to the left of that is Oris and I on our research trip in Geneva at the courthouse where we are holding the documents of a document that indicates on the left-hand side one of Oris's relatives, ancestors, and on the right-hand side, my great grandfather deeded property to the church for the church and the cemetery that we visited during that visit. And in that lower left-hand corner is that beautiful tapestry by Vivian Smith, which represents the tapestry, the feeling of putting together our family history. And we can end this slide by saying, I haven't learned a whole lot more about Fanny, but I've learned so much more about our family because of my search for her, and it continues. And so that's just one tapestry of a story that started by me being interested in who is that woman in that picture and who are Fanny's people. And that journey continues. If you can put up the second slide that shows during our family reunion, I wanted to share a little bit about what I've learned in a way that would be interesting to our family. So I created a book on Shutterfly and added some images and some words. And this is just another way to share your family story. It doesn't have to be a published book by a publishing house. It can be something that you do in the privacy of your home to put together a couple of pages showing your family history. And that is just what I did here. I put together a book. It was about 32 pages, and it kind of changed the narrative of our discussions for family stories. It added context and texture. It added more details that people could view in the privacy of their own home and really take times to look at it. Everybody doesn't want to hear the long stories about your family history. Everybody is not equipped to do that. And I'm aware of that. So what can we do to provide short stories for our family? So these are just a couple of pages from that booklet that I put together. And again, you see that image of those multicolored connections. These are some of the 40 plus relatives, friends, associates, neighbors, ancestors of mine through discovery that either knew of or were connected to Fanny and her husband. And this is the community of ancestors that I'm currently researching. And so you can take that down and we'll transition to the next story. The next story is about something that my mother shared with me. And again, not everybody has a book that they can write, but they do have a book in them. And this is through my mother's eyes. And what we want to share here is recollections written as a little girl from one single journal entry and a glimpse into her life in Pensacola, Florida, where my grandfather worked ranged from logging to unexpected adventures in the backwoods. And her childhood memories remind us that even the smallest recollections can offer a window into her past. So this is my mother on the right-hand side. And my grandfather named her Billy because he wanted a son. And she was an only child. And so this is Billy's thoughts that I'm sharing with you. I gave my mother a journal many years ago, along with all family members. And I asked them, just put in the journal anything that you want me to share, because I want to put a book together about our family. Several years later, as I was clearing my mother's house after she passed away, I found the journal that I gave her, and it had one page written in it, just one page. And because I didn't have time to spend with it, I just tore that page out, placed it safely in one of my journals, and later I went back to that page to see what she had written. And so the words that she gave me were something that she wrote probably in around 1997. And she was, at that point, she was, I don't know, she was in her 70s. And these are her words that she shared with me. So you can see a copy of the journal page in the middle. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what she wrote on that journal page. And she wrote, that's her picture to the right. That's the only picture we have of her as a baby. And she was born in 1932. And she said that she was born, married, lived in Georgia. That's what it says at the top. Don't know much about Georgia because I was kind of young. Then she wrote, Florida, we lived in Pensacola in 1936 in a little house way back in the woods. There was a nice pond near the house. I guess that's when I started to learn about fishing. I was 4 years old. There was no one else to play with. There was nothing else to do. My only toy was a Raggedy Ann doll, which I kept until it fell apart. My dad worked in a logging camp, sometimes trapped alligators, picked cotton, and got mixed up with some people that was making White Lightning whiskey in the backwoods stills. I remember very well the revenuers or police came to our house one night, knocked on the door, and told my dad he was under arrest. That's all she wrote. And I didn't realize the power of all she wrote so many years later until I found a picture. And it was this picture. This picture is of my grandfather. And it says, Florida State Prison picture. I shared this with my research partner, Oris. And Oris asked me, where did you get that picture? And I said, it was in my grandfather's stuff. And Oris asked me, where did he get it from? And I said, Oris, I can't tell you that. I have no idea. As we were talking, as we do many times throughout the month, we might have these long calls. Oris was looking up in the state prison records, and he found where my grandfather was, in fact, in prison for cow larceny in Florida. And he was there from 1937, March 4th, 1937, until November 11th, 1938. Now, what was amazing about that was my mother, many years later, when she was in her 70s, wrote about something that she was only If she was born in 1932, do the math, she was maybe about 5 years old. She remembered this memory from 5 years old. And piecing together that journal page that she gave me, this photograph, and the quick research fingers of my research partner, I came up with this story that I didn't know, my sisters didn't know. I don't know if the family knew. And so that's the end of this story. This is part of many stories, but do you have a page, a journal, any writings that your family has shared with you? Is there some way that you can add context to your stories? And again, what I always want to do when I share a story, I want to make people want to know more. It doesn't have to be a full blown book. So, this is what I share with you about this story. So, any thoughts about this? How many of you have journals that have been shared with you or that have been left when you um, have cleared out information from your loved ones after they've passed away? Do you have those journals? Have you looked at those journals? Have you read those journals and wondered, how can I honor and memorialize this family history? And of course, there may be things in journals that, you know, you don't want to share everything because there's some things that don't need to be shared publicly. But as I honor the experience of my grandparents. So you saw my grandfather was in prison in that picture. You saw him holding that fish by that home that he had so proudly built in Vassar, Michigan later. So we know that there was a good end to that story. How many of you have stories like that to share? So through my mother's eyes, we saw a snapshot of life in the Deep South, ordinary days mixed with long memories and even some danger. But history doesn't stay in one place, it moves with us. Just as my grandfather's life took an unexpected turn, so did lives in the next generation. And now I want to shift from a young child's memory to a grown son living overseas. And that is a memory of my father. My father's letter, written in Japan in 1946, is just more than words on paper. It's a bridge between home and distant foreign lands, between duty and longing. And his words reveal connections that remind us of the strong connection despite the miles, as he asked about family, friends, and shared glimpses of life as a first sergeant. Let's step into the time and hear the voice through the letter that he sent home. We could have the final.
I have been all the time that I have been in this man's army. But outside of that, I have been doing about as good as any soldier can be doing over here in Japan. The weather has turned out better than I thought it was going to be. We have had some real heavy frost, but as yet, we have not had any snow here in the valley. But we can really see a lot of snow on the mountains, which is not very far away from here. How is everything back home these days? By the way, I hear from different people from home. All I see and hear is that people are getting married and having babies.
What happened? Okay, there's a glitch.
November the 25th, 1946. Dear Mother, at this writing, I am taking a break in between work. In the last few weeks, I have been working harder than I have been all the time that I have been in this man's army. But outside of that, I have been doing about as good as any soldier can be doing over here in Japan. The weather has turned out better than I thought it was going to be. We have had some real heavy frost, but as yet, we have not had any snow here in the valley. But we can really see a lot of snow on the mountains, which is not very far away from here. How is everything back home these days? By the way, I hear from different people from home. All I see and hear is that people are getting married and having babies. How's Buddy and the rest doing these days? I suppose Ike is still living with her husband. Is she not? Smile. Sam was telling me that Clifford Taylor died. What was the trouble with him? Has Carl got out of the army yet? From what I hear, there are a lot of them getting out of this man's army now. That is not regular army. Is it true? By what I hear in the paper, food and other things are going up higher all the time. Are the people getting paid that much money now? Or what are they doing back there? In the last 3 or 4 weeks, we have been having quite a few USO shows, and we have a movie every evening now. By having different events of these kinds makes time go faster and also helps the soldiers get along a lot better. This job as first sergeant is quite steady at times. You can look to be called up at any time of night, and you've got to go. All I say is, it is no better for me. Smile. But all in all, it is not bad. Well, I will close for this time. We'll write more later. Your son, First Sergeant L. Clark. P.S. Hope to hear from you very soon.
So we've traveled through 3 very different journeys. And I have to give credit to dear friend LeCount Holmes for the voiceover. This is one of the things that I learned as I tried to tell different types of stories is to utilize the resources that you have to make those stories come to life. And finding someone who can embody the voice and the spirit of my father was truly a blessing. And I'm honored to be able to share my father's words using LeCount's voice. So I want to just say thank you for that. You've seen spoken word, written and recorded, and from stories told from my elders, my mother's childhood memories, and my father's letters sent across the world. And each one of these holds a very special piece of family legacy. How many ways can you share short and meaningful stories with your family? What can you do in order to preserve the memories and to share it for generations to come? A newspaper article you might have could be the springboard for a short story. It could bring back memories that many other family members had no idea of, and to put some context to it. Keep it short because everybody isn't a genealogist and doesn't want to know the full-blown story, and leave the audience wanting more. What these stories teach us is that history isn't just about the dates and events. It's about the people. It's about everyday moments, challenges, and the triumphs, deep-rooted connections that shape the people that we are. And it's what we want to preserve so that they don't fade away. And as I close, I want to leave you with this thought that every family has stories waiting to be told. And I'm sure many of you have heard that when a elderly person passes away, and even anyone passes away, it's like a library burning. And so how can we capture those history moments before that library burns? I encourage you to take the time to record stories of your elders, revisit those old letters and pictures that you have. Take time to share those moments any way you can so that our family's history is preserved, their struggles and their triumphs. I want to thank you for joining me and sharing these stories today. I want to challenge you to share your own stories, and I hope it inspires you to uncover and share those pieces of history that need to be told. Thank you so much. Brenda, do you have any questions or anything you want to ask me?
I do. Yeah, bravo. I want to say bravo, bravo. We have so many wonderful comments in the chat that this has been a great, wonderful experience. Many people are sharing what they are doing with their families or have done. Some have books about family stories. Some have taken videos. So people are joining in on the journey to search their family's history. You have inspired me too. I have a lot of blank journals around here. And since I've been listening to you, I've decided on an approach that I could do with my family stories. I have letters from my great great aunt to her great aunt to her niece, which was my great aunt. So there's lots of material. You've really inspired me and others about, what we can use to prepare our stories, to present our stories to our families. And I like what you said, keep it short, because everybody doesn't want or need all of the details. But the point is, I think, to start with some of the details and the stories, because I'm a good example. The younger people behind me don't know the stories of the generations before me. I'm the fifth generation. I know the stories. So I need to capture that and share that with them. So I think that you were definitely inspiring. People from across the country are making those kind of comments. But you did say something. I'd like to ask a question. You did talk about your research partner working with auras. Can you share a little bit about the value of having a research partner, uh, and how that plays out? And particularly, are you looking for a research partner in a professional colleague who's doing similar work, or can it be a family member?
Thank you, Brenda. Great question. Um, First of all, I wasn't looking.
Mhm.
Uh, I think the ancestors led us to find each other because Oris and I are related, and we met through the project of working with Bernice Bennett, and we met because we had ancestors both in Alabama. Finding a research partner is sometimes it can be by happenstance, like Oris and I, or sometimes it could be very intentional. You want to find someone who perhaps has skills that are a little bit different than yours, certainly who has an interest in something so that you can connect on those points of interest, but also has interest in a skill set that is far different from yours, so that in many instances, that skill set can augment your research, and a skill set that you have might be able to support and help them. Um, uh, I have been fortunate during the pandemic to meet a lot of people through my interest in various genealogy groups. Um, I am connected with the Indiana African American Genealogy Group, the New Jersey OGS Group, an Oregon Special Interest Group in African American Studies, um, interest group, no, an African American Genealogy Group in Arkansas. And so, in knowing and learning about the individuals in this group, you might find somebody that you just naturally gravitate towards. So, having a research partner is very valuable, and I encourage you to find someone, however it occurs.
Great. That's good information. Someone also wanted to know, at what point did you find the journals? I guess you noted journals from your family members.
I've had them. I've had them at various points in my life. Um, when my father passed away, I had a fire safe that he had, and my mother, she said, go through it, do whatever you need to. And I found a journal of his father, and it was written between 1896 1906 and on into like 1914. But I, didn't pay any attention to it.
Mhm.
I have my grandmother's journal, my mother's journals when she was suffering from tuberculosis in a sanatorium in Howell, Michigan. I got those, of course, after my mother passed away. Um, my father had some journals when he was in high school. I just found one of those about, I don't know, 6 months ago when he was in his last year of high school. So sometimes I think the ancestors might know that you are the keeper of the family secrets and they just gravitate towards you. So I'm very fortunate. I have all kind of journals and letters and photographs and all of that.
Well, that's how I felt when I found those letters between my aunts, that there was something so precious about that because they were just writing. One was in Mississippi and one was in Detroit. The niece was in Detroit. And they wrote about fashion, family, and their careers, and pretty phenomenal for women at that time. But the letters were just so very interesting. So yeah, you do feel like there's something special because I just found them in helping her to clean out her house after 45, 50 years in one home. So
And you have
that's
to think, Brenda, letters in that time was like social media is now. They would
sure.
include so many details, and so they are really such a precious gift to have.
Yes, I feel like they are. Well, Dr. Clark, I just can't thank you enough. And I want to remind our audience that with all that Dr. Clark does, she still finds time to volunteer for AARP. And we are so appreciative of her time. And I must say, I know she volunteers across the country, but she is a Detroit area volunteer. So we really love having her and having the opportunity to work with her. Dr. Clark, tell us a little bit about your volunteerism experience so that you might inspire some others on our call to volunteer with AARP.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. My volunteer experience started out when I was a caregiver for my mother along with my sisters, and I utilized a lot of the benefits of the caregiver um, aarp.org/caregiver website as we took care of my mother's needs. And at the time, the Associate State Director was aware of my journey and she asked me if I would present. And that's kind of how it started. I just talked about caregiving and it flourished from there. What I like about my volunteer experience is that AARP allows you to do what you are good at, your skills, your abilities, and find something where your skills and talents can be useful. Um, Locally in the Detroit area, as well as nationally, I am able to use my talents and experiences to support the community efforts. And that's one of the best things I like about my AARP experience.
Well, that's wonderful. And you were in the forefront of some of the work that we are doing around caregiving. And we have lots of resources at AARP to support caregivers. If you go to aarp.org and just type in caregivers in the search engine, you will be able to find information that's relevant to your state, resources in your particular state. So we really appreciate you, Dr. Clark, and all that you do.
And can I just add one more thing, Brenda? During my caregiving experience, that's when I also began to have time to dig deeper into my genealogy work because I would be spending time with my mother. I was caregiver on the weekends. And as I sat with her, I would go through pictures, go through, things and begin to ask those questions of myself and begin to explore some of the nuances of family history. And so part of being a caregiver also helped me to encourage my own brain health because, sometimes when you connect with some of those things, it encourages your brain health as well. So there was a lot of interconnectedness with caregiving, brain health, genealogy, helping family. So it all connected together.
Okay. Thank you again. We really appreciate you. We want to thank our audience. And some of you have asked how to see this again. You can use the very same link that you used today to see this program again, and the prior programs. You can use those links. There are links in the chat that will connect you to not only the program, but some of the material that was available to download during some of those previous episodes. So thank you very much for joining us for Black History Month. This is the last of the 4-part series, but there are lots of events that you can follow up with AARP. Just go to aarp.org and you can find events in your particular state that are in person and virtual. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Dr. Clark.
Thank you.
Take care.